The helicopter touched down hard on the landing pad, and the desert swallowed the sound almost immediately. 3 seconds. That was how long it took for the laughter to start. Not loud laughter. Not the open, careless kind. It was the quieter sort, shoulder to shoulder. The kind men share when they don't want to be caught doing it. A glance, a smirk, a breath exhaled through the nose. Sergeant First Class Derek Holloway crossed his arms and said nothing, but the line of his mouth said everything. Corporal James Fitch leaned toward the man next to him and spoke behind the back of his hand. "She can't even stand." The ramp lowered. Evelyn Shaw rolled out of the helicopter with the patience of someone who had been in a hurry before and learned it cost too much. She was 31 years old, and she moved through space like she owned it in ways that had nothing to do with speed. Her chair was standard military issue, matte black, modified at the armrests where a custom mount had been fitted and then removed, leaving 2 clean screw holes that caught the afternoon light. Her uniform was creased exactly right. Her dark hair was pulled back without ceremony. Her eyes were the gray of rifle smoke, and they moved across the faces assembled on the tarmac the way a scope moves across a ridgeline. She cataloged each one. She did not linger. The dog came down the ramp behind her, unhurried, a German shepherd with a black saddle and a chest broad enough to stop conversation. He weighed 83 pounds and moved like water in a channel, fast only when fast was needed, otherwise fluid, contained. His name was Rex, and he positioned himself to Evelyn's left with the deliberateness of someone who has done the same thing 10,000 times and intends to do it 10,000 more. Sergeant Holloway stepped forward. He was a large man, sun-darkened, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been installed for emphasis. "Warrant Officer Shaw." He said it the way you'd read a name off a form. No inflection. No welcome. "I'm Sergeant Holloway. I'll be your liaison while you're embedded with the unit." "Thank you, Sergeant. We weren't briefed on the nature of your role." "That's intentional." Holloway looked at Rex. Rex looked at Holloway. The dog's ears were forward, not aggressive, just attentive, which was somehow worse. "The dog needs to be kenneled at night. Unit regs. Rex sleeps where I sleep." She said it without drama, the same way she might have said the sun rises in the east. Just a fact. The world could accept it or not, but it would remain true either way. Behind Holloway, the unit stood in a loose line, 8 men, special operations. Lean and hard and accustomed to being the most lethal thing in any room they entered. They watched her the way predators watch something unfamiliar, not afraid, but recalibrating. A woman in a wheelchair with a modified rifle mount and a combat dog was not in their standard frame of reference. One of them, Corporal Fitch, the same one who had spoken behind his hands, said, at a volume calibrated for deniability, "She's a liability." Evelyn rolled forward 4 feet and stopped. She looked at Fitch for exactly 3 seconds. Not challenging, not wounded, just looking. Then she looked away. She reached down and rested 2 fingers lightly along the back of Rex's neck, just the weight of them, barely contact. The dog didn't react visibly, but something in him settled, and something in her settled, too, a frequency they shared and didn't need to name. "Where's my quarters?" she said. Holloway pointed. She rolled toward the building without looking back. Nobody laughed out loud after that, but the quieter kind continued for the rest of the evening, passed between bunks and across mess hall tables. A currency of skepticism that nobody had any reason yet to spend differently. The desert night fell fast and total, the way it does when there are no trees to slow it down. Through the window of the room, she'd been assigned small, utilitarian, a cot and a weapons locker, and a vent that rattled. Evelyn Shaw watched the perimeter lights come on one by one. Rex lay beside her, chin on his forepaws, watching the same darkness. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said. He didn't move, but his tail swept the floor once, slow and certain, the way a pendulum marks time. The room they gave her faced east, which she appreciated. She had always liked knowing where the sun was going to come from. She had been born in Billings, Montana, the daughter of a hunting guide named Gordon Shaw who had taught her to hold still before he taught her anything else. Most people move too much, he'd told her when she was 7, both of them lying prone on a cold hillside, watching a mule deer 300 yards away. They think moving means doing something. Mostly it just means missing. She had been still ever since. The Army had taken her at 19 and discovered, through the systematic process of elimination by which the military occasionally finds its best people, that Evelyn Shaw could shoot. Not adequately. Not well. She could shoot the way a river moves effortlessly, inevitably, as though any other outcome would be a violation of natural law. At Fort Benning, Her scores on the marksmanship range had drawn the kind of silence that indicates something significant has just happened. The instructor had walked the length of the target board twice before writing anything down. By 24, she was attached to a special operations element operating in a theater she was not at liberty to name. By 26, she was the best long-range shooter they had. The injury happened on a Tuesday, not in combat, which would have been, in some ways, cleaner. A vehicle rollover during a night transit. A road that should have been cleared and wasn't. A series of fractional decisions that accumulated into catastrophe the way they always do. She had been in the third seat, and the third seat became the bottom of a 30-foot drop when the road gave way. 3 vertebrae. A cascade of surgeries. A year of rehabilitation that was more correctly described as a sustained argument with her own body, which had opinions she did not share about what was possible. She lost function below the waist. She lost none of it anywhere else. The Army, in its institutional way, had begun the process of transitioning her out. Forms were generated. Medical boards convened. The architecture of a conclusion was assembled, piece by piece, around her. And then Master Sergeant Raymond Cutler had walked into her recovery room, sat down in the chair beside her bed, and said, without preamble, "How long have you been working with dogs?" She'd blinked. "Since I was a kid. Military working dogs? 2 years." Before the deployment, he had looked at her for a long moment. Not at the hospital bed, not at the machinery, not at the thing that had happened to her. At her, the way you look at a tool you're trying to understand the full application of. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I need you to think about it before you answer. All right. If you couldn't pull a trigger yourself, if that option was removed entirely, how would you still be in a fight?" She had known the answer before he finished the question. The program had no official name. It existed in the margins of several different military initiatives and was funded through a budget line that described it as Advanced K9 Integration Research. What it actually was, a methodology for pairing a handler with severe physical limitation to a working dog trained to operational combat standards, with the handler functioning as the tactical intelligence and the dog as the physical instrument. Nobody had done it before. Not at this level. The first 6 months were almost entirely failure. Not catastrophic failure, nothing exploded. Nobody was hurt, but the quiet, grinding failure of 2 beings trying to build a shared grammar from scratch. Rex had come to her already trained to a high standard. Tracking, apprehension, object detection, basic patrol work. He was good at all of it. But good was not what Cutler's program required. What the program required was something closer to fusion. A standard K9 team operates on explicit command. The handler gives an instruction. The dog executes it. This model requires the handler to be ahead of the situation to see the problem, process it, formulate the response, transmit it. In the fraction of a second between formulation and transmission, things happen. In combat, fractions of seconds are not abstract units. They are the entire difference. What Evelyn had to build, what she and Rex had to build together, was a system that eliminated that gap, where she was not issuing instructions but extending intention, and Rex was not receiving commands but anticipating conclusions. It had taken 6 months to understand the problem. It took another 8 months to solve it. The solution was, in the end, deceptively simple. She had to stop trying to control him and start trusting him, and he had to stop waiting for permission and start reading purpose. The commands were still there, they remained necessary. A kind of shared vocabulary for the cases where the situation was ambiguous or the decision was genuinely hers to make. But the 11 field trial data told the same story every time. The fastest and most effective engagements were the ones where her role had essentially been a word at the beginning of a sentence Rex was already writing. Go. And he was already gone. Nobody had done it before. Not at this level. Evelyn Shaw and Rex had spent 14 months learning to become one thing. The results of that 14 months were classified at a level that meant almost no one in the unit she'd just been assigned to had any access to them. Her file, as they could see it, showed prior service, marksmanship qualification, current disability status, current assignment. It showed nothing about what she'd been doing for the past 2 years. Nothing about what Rex could do. Nothing about the 11 field trials that had yielded results that, in Cutler's words, had made 2 senior officers ask that the footage be run back because they were certain the playback speed had been altered. So when the men of the unit looked at her and calculated liability, they were working from a dataset that was almost entirely wrong. She knew this. She had been selected in part because she knew this. The question was never whether she was a threat. The question was whether, when it mattered, The people around her would be in position to use what she was. She lay on her cot in the desert night, Rex's warmth a solid fact against her side, and thought about the perimeter, about the spacing of the lights, about the one blind spot, 40 meters northeast of the vehicle depot, where two overlapping camera angles still left a wedge of shadow if you knew exactly where to stand. She had noticed it during the approach. She filed it away. 3 days after her arrival, Holloway organized what he called a familiarization exercise. He used that word specifically, which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about what it actually was. The unit set up a firing range along the eastern edge of the base. Steel targets at varying distances, 200, 400, 600, 800 meters. Standard qualification course. The men went through it in pairs, quick and proficient. The kind of shooting that comes from so much repetition it has stopped being skill and become reflex. Holloway watched from behind, arms still crossed, saying nothing, saying everything. Evelyn watched the men shoot. Not casually, she was building a profile of each one. Calloway, technically sound, consistent, slightly slow on the transition between distances, the kind of shooter who would outperform under pressure because his process was reliable. Fitch, fast and flashy, a little overconfident at 800, compensating with speed where precision would serve better. Garrett, the best of them, though she suspected he didn't entirely know it. His read of the range was intuitive in a way that classroom training couldn't replicate, probably came from a background with a rifle before the military. She filed it all away. Then Holloway turned to Evelyn. Warrant officer, range is yours. She rolled to the position. Her rifle, a modified bolt-action, fitted to a stable low-profile mount that could be operated from the chair, was already across her lap. She chambered around with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The men behind her had stopped talking. She was aware of their attention the way you're aware of sunlight on your back. Warm, directional, impossible to ignore. She looked down the scope at the 400-meter target and let herself breathe once, slowly, all the way to the bottom of her lungs. Then she pulled the shot half an inch left. It struck the edge of the target. Not a miss, technically, but not clean. Behind her, she heard Fitch exhale a sound that was approximately a laugh with most of the sound taken out of it. She noted it. She noted the exact quality of it, not contempt, which would have been one data point, but satisfaction, which was a different one. He wanted her to fail. Wanting someone to fail is a specific kind of investment, and specific investments tell you things about what a person needs to believe. She filed it away. She fired again at 600. Pulled it fractionally right. Plausible. Consistent with someone overcompensating. At 800, she let the shot go wide by 4 inches. She racked the bolt and placed the rifle across her lap and looked at nothing in particular. That's it, Holloway said. Range is clear, she said. There was a pause. Then someone at the back, she thought it was a man named Garrett, based on the direction of the voice, said quietly, "Why is she even here?" She didn't answer. Rex, sitting to her left, had not moved his eyes from her face the entire time. When they returned to the main building and the men dispersed, she wheeled to a corner of the courtyard that had a narrow view of the perimeter and sat there for 20 minutes, watching the northeast quadrant, watching the shadow between the vehicle depot and the outer wall. The shadow moved once, briefly, at the 16-minute mark. She noted the time. She noted the direction. She said nothing to anyone. The third time she noticed it, an irregularity in the shadow pattern. A shape that resolved and dissolved too quickly for equipment malfunction. She went to Holloway. She found him in the operations room, bent over a table covered in topographic maps, talking to a man she hadn't been introduced to, whose rank insignia indicated he was at least a major. "Sergeant," she said, "I need to report an anomaly." Holloway straightened. He had the look of a man who has been interrupted at a task that felt important and is now being asked to acknowledge that something else might also be important. He did not enjoy this look. "Warrant officer, the northeast perimeter. Vehicle depot blind spot. I've observed irregular movement 3 times in the past 36 hours. I believe someone is conducting reconnaissance of the approach." The major looked at her, then at Holloway. Holloway looked at the maps. The northeast perimeter is covered by overlapping surveillance on a 60-minute rotation cycle. There's a wedge of shadow in the overlap, approximately 3 meters wide. It's visible from the approach road if you know where to stand. And how would a reconnaissance element know where to stand? She let the implication sit where it landed. Someone had told them. Someone had stood at that approach and worked out the geometry, or someone who already knew the geometry had passed it along. She did not say this explicitly, because it was not her role to manage the internal security investigation. Her role was to report what she had seen. What were the times of the observed movements? The major said. She gave him the times. Exact, down to the minute. His face did something she read as genuine attention, which was an improvement. I'll have the surveillance team run an audit, Holloway said, in a tone that meant he would not have the surveillance team run an audit. Sergeant? Thank you for the report, warrant officer. She looked at him for one moment. Not the 3-second assessment she'd given Fitch on the first day. This was longer, more specific. The kind of look that is not a challenge but a recording. I am noting this, and you should know that I am noting it. Then she turned and went back to her quarters. Rex was already standing when she came in. He had been lying down, and now he was standing. And the difference was a fact she understood without needing to analyze it. Her hand went to the back of his neck. I know, she said. He didn't settle the way he had on the first night. His attention stayed directed toward the northeast wall, and it stayed there through the evening meal she brought back and through the hour after, when the desert went from orange to purple to the deep, specific black of a sky with too many stars. At 0200, a flare went up from the outer perimeter. Then the shooting started. The base had a specific sound when it went from sleep to combat, and that sound was human voices losing their grammar calls that began as commands and became something roar, the language of the body when the mind can't keep up with events. Evelyn was already dressed. She had not been sleeping. She moved to the door and cracked it, scanning the courtyard. 2 men sprinting toward the eastern gate. Another hitting the external lights manually because the automated system had, apparently, failed. A 4th man, Corporal Fitch, standing in the middle of the courtyard with his rifle at his shoulder and his head turning back and forth with the specific motion of someone looking for a target and not finding one. 4 armed men had entered through the northeast perimeter, the blind spot. Exactly as she had said. She ran the math in the 4 seconds she had available. The surveillance failure meant the breach had been deliberate, not opportunistic. This had been planned with a knowledge of the base's systems that implied either prior intelligence or inside assistance. 4 men was not an assault force. It was a precision team with a specific objective. Communications building. Had to be. Take out comms first, isolate the base, then signal for the larger element or extract with whatever they came for. One of the intruders had reached the communications building. Another had cut around the vehicle depot and was moving along the south wall. The unit's response was fragmented. They'd been hit from an unexpected angle, come awake in the wrong sequence, and the 30 seconds of organizational chaos were costing them ground. Private First Class Nathan Webb, 22 years old, first deployment, assigned to comms, was inside the communications building when the door came open. He had no time to reach his weapon. He was pushed back against the wall by a man with a sidearm and the flat, functional expression of someone executing a plan. Evelyn saw it through the window as she rolled to the edge of the courtyard. She could not go through the door fast enough, could not cross the open ground without exposing herself to the second man along the south wall, could not provide covering fire for Webb without drawing the other 2. The unit was not in position. Holloway was behind the main building, responding to the eastern gate breach. The feint, she understood now. The eastern gate noise was the feint. Get the senior operator moving the wrong direction, then come through the real entry. Clean. Planned by someone who understood how this unit would respond. 4 minutes from breach to comms compromise, if nothing changed. She had less than 90 seconds. She looked at Rex. He was already looking at her. The math was fast. The math was always fast. With them, it ran below the level of language. A calculus of distance and angle and timing that had been rehearsed until it was structural, part of how they moved through the world. She didn't say anything yet. Not yet. She waited. This was the part that looked like hesitation to anyone watching. She knew that. She had seen it in the field trial footage, how observers would tense during the 3 or 4 seconds before she moved, reading stillness as paralysis, interpreting calm as confusion. The men in the courtyard, to whatever extent they were watching her at all, probably thought she was frozen. She was, in fact, running the problem. Second armed man. Angle of movement, projected position in 8 seconds, cover option at the depot corner. Third man, position unknown, last seen near the fuel storage. Fourth, flanking right, currently exposed. Webb. Inside the building, pinned, not yet hurt. The first man's sidearm was pointed at the wall beside Webb's head. A warning. He wanted information or access, not a corpse. He would not fire for another 15 to 20 seconds. That was the window. The window was now. She looked at Rex. She said one word, "Go." Rex left the ground. Not running the distinction matters. Running is sequential. One foot then the next. What Rex did was an eruption, a sudden rearrangement of potential energy into kinetic, 83 pounds of trained muscle moving across 30 feet of open courtyard in a straight line that nothing short of a wall was going to interrupt. He hit the communications building door at full stride and shouldered it open with a sound like a gunshot. 1. The man inside spun. His weapon hand came up. Rex's jaw closed around the wrist before the arc completed, and the combination of forward momentum and angular rotation translated the man's body down and left in a way that had nothing to do with human strength and everything to do with physics. The weapon discharged into the floor. 2. 3. Webb pressed himself against the wall as the man went down. Rex released the wrist and moved not a bite, a strike, a calculated application of force to the throat that cut air without tearing tissue. Enough to stop, not more. 4. 5. The man was on the floor, outside. The second man at the south wall had heard the weapon discharge and broken cover, running toward the building. He came around the corner at a full sprint and met Rex, who had come back through the door at the same speed he'd entered, and the impact was enough to lift him off his feet before Rex had even properly engaged. 6. 7. 8. The man landed on his shoulder and tried to roll to his feet. Rex had his ankle. A single controlled shake. The ankle was not broken, the bone held, but the man stopped trying to stand. Nine. The third man, the one whose position had been unknown, came out from behind the fuel storage with his weapon up. He saw the second man on the ground. He saw Rex. He had perhaps 1 second of decision-making available to him. He did not use it well. Rex covered the distance in 3 strides and took the man's forearm in a grip that did not break and did not yield, and the weapon fell, and the man did too. Then, 11. The fourth man, the flanking man, the one who had been moving right, had stopped. He was standing 20 feet from Rex. His weapon was still in his hand. He could have fired. The angle was open. The range was close. He did not fire. Perhaps he was assessing the dog. Perhaps he was assessing something else. Perhaps, and this, Evelyn had come to believe, was the most accurate explanation. He had watched what happened to the first 3 men in approximately 10 seconds, and his body had arrived at a conclusion before his conscious mind had quite finished the argument. Rex faced him, not growling, not threatening, just facing him, 83 pounds of absolute certainty, with what could only be described as patience. The man lowered his weapon. 12. Silence. The courtyard was still. The men of the unit stood at various points, some in doorways, some frozen mid-stride, one with a rifle still raised at a target that was no longer standing. Holloway was against the eastern wall with his mouth slightly open. Webb came out of the communications building doorway. He looked at the 3 men on the ground. He looked at Rex. He looked across the courtyard at Evelyn. No one spoke. Rex walked back across the courtyard at a steady, unhurried pace and positioned himself at Evelyn's left side. She looked at the fourth man, still standing with his hands visible, his weapon on the ground. "Cuff them," she said. Her voice was level. It had not changed in pitch or volume from any conversation she'd had since she arrived. She might have been reading a coordinates report. She might have been relaying the weather. Holloway moved. The rest of the unit moved. And still, for several seconds after the intruders were on their knees with their wrists bound, after the lights came fully on, after the initial shock of it had begun to resolve into the individual fact of what had just happened, no one in that courtyard said a single word. It lasted longer than you'd expect. The silence was not the absence of sound. The generators were running. Someone's radio was hissing static. 2 men were breathing hard from the sprint across the compound. Webb, inside the building, had knocked something over, and the sound of it falling down a surface was distinct in the thin desert air. But the silence held, in the way that silences hold after something that does not have immediate language. Fitch was the first to make a sound. It was not words, it was a breath, expelled fast, the kind that comes out when the body needs to release pressure somewhere. Then he said, very quietly, "What the hell?" Not a question, not rhetorical, just the 3 words that were the honest inventory of what his mind was working with. Holloway had the men secured and was standing over the one Rex had taken down first, who was awake and holding his wrist with the careful attention of someone discovering the exact dimensions of a pain. Holloway looked at the man, then at Rex, then across the courtyard at Evelyn. His face did something complicated. Evelyn waited. "Area secured," she said. Her voice carried no weight, no emphasis. Just the assessment, accurate and neutral. Webb came out of the building and stopped 3 feet short of Rex, who regarded him with calm professional interest. Webb was young enough that his face still showed everything, and what it showed now was the complete landscape of a person who has just been in a room with a gun pointed nearby, and is now on the other side of that moment. His hands were shaking, not badly, but visibly. He looked at Rex. He looked at Evelyn. He stopped, started again. Is he okay? Evelyn looked at Rex. Rex looked entirely fine. He looked, in fact, the way he always looked, present, contained, attentive to her. He's fine, she said. Webb nodded. His hands were still shaking. He seemed to become aware of this and put them in his pockets. Garrett, who had been the voice at the back during the firing range test, why is she even here, was standing near the fuel depot. He had not moved since the 12 seconds ended. Now he walked forward slowly, the way people walk when they're not sure what they're approaching. He stopped about 6 feet from Evelyn. He looked at the ground. He looked at Rex. He looked at the 3 secured men who had been, 60 seconds ago, in control of a situation that was now entirely reversed. He did not say anything, but something in how he stood, the angle of his shoulders, the direction of his eyes changed. And it was the kind of change that does not reverse. Holloway came and stood in front of Evelyn. His arms were no longer crossed. 4 armed individuals, he said. He was talking through it the way you talk through a thing you are still working to accept, in what should have been a fully secured perimeter. Yes. Approach through the northeast blind spot. Yes. The one you reported. He said it without inflection. Not an apology. Not quite. But the statement carried a weight that he wasn't trying to avoid. Yes, she said. Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, the report is going up the chain tonight. I know. The surveillance audit. Sergeant, she said gently, and it was the gentleness that stopped him. It doesn't matter. He looked at her. What matters now, she said, is that we identify whether this was a probe or a prelude. He nodded. Once. Slowly. With the gravity of a man revising his assessment of something, and knowing that the revision is overdue. Right, he said. Right. He turned to address the unit. I need the footage from all perimeter cameras. I need the 4th man interviewed by 0400. Fitch. Webb. Start on the comms. Shack. Make sure nothing was accessed or compromised. The men moved. There was a different quality to it now. They moved with the kind of urgency that comes not from panic but from purpose, which is a better thing entirely. Rex sat at Evelyn's left and watched the courtyard clear. She rested her hand on his shoulder. Just the weight of it. Just the contact. At 0530, a vehicle arrived from the regional command. Out of it stepped a man in his late 50s with the kind of economy of movement that accumulates after 30 years of choosing the necessary action over the comfortable one. Master Sergeant Raymond Cutler wore the wear of his career on him, not as damage but as precision, everything spare, everything intentional, nothing wasted. He walked to where Evelyn Shaw was sitting in the courtyard, in the thin early light that precedes actual dawn, with Rex beside her and a cup of coffee she had not touched. He looked at the courtyard, the equipment still out, the marked positions where the 4 men had been taken down, the way the men of the unit moved around her now, not differently than before, necessarily, but with a different quality of attention, like they were orienting to something. I heard it was 12 seconds, Cutler said. Closer to 11, she said. I round up. He sat down on the low wall beside her, not across from her, beside, which was a distinction he had always been careful about. Holloway, he said. He'll be fine. He's processing. He's the kind of man who revises when the evidence requires it, which is the only kind worth having. Cutler nodded. He had the footage on his tablet. She knew this because he would always have the footage, and he had probably watched it 3 times on the drive over. He didn't mention this. He didn't need to. There'll be a formal briefing, he said. The unit will be read into the program. That was always the plan. You could have told them earlier. She thought about this honestly, the way she thought about most things all the way through, not looking for confirmation, looking for the accurate center of it. If I'd told them before they saw it, she said, they would have nodded politely and continued to believe what they already believed. People learn from evidence, not briefings. Cutler looked at Rex. Rex looked back at him with the absolute lack of sentimentality of someone who knew him and respected him and saw no need to perform either. He's ready? Cutler said. He's been ready, she said. We both have. Cutler picked up the coffee from where she'd set it down and held it out to her. She took it. The program's going formal, he said. Pending this mission outcome, we're looking at integration across 3 additional units over the next 18 months. She was quiet. That means training, he said. Certification. You'd be running it. I know. Is that a yes? She looked at the desert, which was going from gray to gold the way it does in that specific hour when the sun is deciding. Rex's ears lifted at something in the middle distance, a bird, probably, or the sound of the bass coming fully awake. Ask me again after the mission, she said. The formal briefing happened at 0800. Cutler laid it out plainly. The way he did everything. The program's history, Evelyn's qualifications, Rex's training record, the field trial results. He put the numbers on a screen and left them there, because numbers have a certain authority that explanation sometimes undermines. He did not editorialize. He did not defend. He presented what was there. Shaw's engagement score across the 11 field trials, 94.2% efficiency, compared to a two-person human element average of 71%. Rex's response latency from command to engagement, 0.3 seconds. Duration of the last night's contact, 11.7 seconds from first engagement to all 4 targets neutralized. He showed the footage. Not the filtered, edited version that would eventually make its way through official channels. The raw footage, with the timestamp running in the corner, from 3 different angles, in real time, then again at half speed, then at a quarter speed, because at a quarter speed you could watch Rex's decision-making process in a way that was impossible at full speed. The geometry of his paths, the sequencing of engagements, the controlled application of force that took each man down without killing him, which was itself a feat of calibrated precision that several of the men in the room, watching it, recognized as more difficult than the alternative. At a quarter speed, the 12 seconds became 48. You could see everything. You could see Rex make choices. You could see the fourth man's body language shift the moment he understood, on some pre-verbal level, that the calculus had changed. You could see Evelyn, motionless in the courtyard, not watching Rex because she didn't need to watch Rex, watching the fourth man instead, reading his stillness, ready to give the next command if a next command was needed. The room watched the footage through twice. Nobody asked for a third run. Nobody asked the footage to be run back. Nobody spoke for almost 40 seconds after Cutler finished. Then Fitch said, "The shots she pulled at the range. Intentional," Cutler confirmed. Fitch processed this. She threw the test. She was evaluating how you'd respond. Another silence. Fitch had the particular stillness of someone who understands he is holding information that retrospectively changes the meaning of several previous interactions, and is not entirely comfortable with the weight of this. The range test, the way they'd laughed, the way she'd rolled away without reacting. All of it had been data she was collecting. A baseline measurement of how this unit processed information they had not asked for and did not expect. He looked at Evelyn. She was sitting at the back of the room, as she had been throughout the briefing, present, attentive, not drawing attention. Rex was at her left, as always. Fitch held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the screen, then at his hands. The intelligence about the perimeter said a man named Calloway, a staff sergeant Evelyn had assessed on day 1 as thorough, careful, the type whose first instinct in any situation was to understand it before responding. She reported that how long before contact? Approximately 36 hours before the incursion, Cutler said. Calloway nodded slowly. And we didn't act on it, correct? The word sat in the room. Correct. No assignment of blame in it, but no removal of it either. Just the fact, with all its implications fully present. Calloway looked at Evelyn. "I'm sorry. We should have listened." "Yes," she said. "Not it's fine. Not don't worry about it. Just the clean acknowledgement. Yes, you should have. Next time, listen." She said it without anger. Without the rehearsed dignity of someone who has been wronged and wants it noted. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without ornament, because that was how information transmitted most clearly. Garrett, who had stood near the fuel depot in silence, who had walked forward in that uncertain way, who had not yet found words, spoke for the first time since the briefing began. "How long did it take?" he said. "To train him." Evelyn looked at Rex. Rex, in the manner of someone whose name has been mentioned, looked briefly at Evelyn and then back at the room. 14 months, she said. "For this level, does he?" Garrett started, then stopped, apparently unsure how to finish. "He understands approximately 200 discrete commands," she said, 26 of which are tactically operational. But the commands are the smaller part of it. What's the larger part? She looked at Rex for a moment. It was the look of two people who have been in rooms together where the stakes were high and have therefore arrived at a knowledge of each other that goes below language. "He knows what I'm thinking before I give the command," she said. Not because he can read minds, because we've spent enough time together that my body changes a fraction of a second before I decide, and he's trained to read that change. By the time I say go, he's already calculated the geometry. The room was quiet. That, said Cutler, from the front, is the program. 3 weeks later, the mission had concluded. The results were classified in the specific way that results are classified when they are both successful and precedent-setting. When someone in a room above Cutler's had looked at the numbers and said, we need to be careful how this gets out, and careful how fast we move, because if we move wrong it becomes something other than what it is. The unit was shipping out in the morning. The desert at dusk in late summer is a specific thing. The light goes horizontal, and everything it touches becomes its own version of gold, the sand, the buildings, the equipment stacked near the vehicle depot. Shadows stretch out in the opposite direction from morning, and in that lengthening the objects they belong to look somehow more permanent, more grounded, as if the day is pressing them into the earth before it leaves. Evelyn Shaw was in the eastern courtyard. She had been out there for most of the past hour. Rex was working. Not working, no stakes, no target, no mission imperative. Working the way athletes move when there is no competition scheduled. The disciplined pleasure of the body doing what it was built to do. She sent him in arcs across the open ground, brought him back, directed him through a sequence of tactical positions, released him again. He moved the way he always moved. Fluid, certain, the physical grammar of purpose. She watched him through an expression that didn't have a name in the standard emotional lexicon. Pride was part of it. Gratitude was part of it. Something that was neither, and both the feeling you have toward a thing that has become genuinely indispensable, not because you couldn't exist without it, but because with it you are something more complete than you'd be otherwise. She heard footsteps on the gravel. Nathan Webb came and stood beside her, with the slightly uncertain quality of a 22-year-old who is not entirely sure he has the right to be in the space he's entered but is going to try anyway. He put his hands in his pockets. He watched Rex. Behind Webb, at the far edge of the courtyard, 2 other men had drifted out of the building and sat down on the low concrete wall. They weren't watching her directly. They were looking at Rex, at the arcs he cut across the open ground, at the way he moved back to her side each time with the loyalty of something that has made a permanent and irrevocable choice about where it belongs. But Evelyn understood that watching Rex was, in this case, also watching her. The two of them were not separable in any way that mattered. That had been the point. That had always been the point. You think he likes it, Webb said. The work? Yeah. She considered this. I think he likes doing something he's good at, and he's good at most things. So yes, I think he likes most of what he does. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, when the guy had his weapon up, in the comms building, you don't have to. No, I want to. He took a breath. I've gone over it probably 100 times. Those few seconds. And I keep getting stuck on I didn't do anything. I was just standing there. I couldn't have done anything, but you keep thinking you should have. He looked at her sideways. Yeah. She watched Rex complete a long arc across the courtyard and come back to position. Smooth and unhurried. Here's the thing about what Rex does, she said. People see it and think, fast, strong, trained, and all of those are true, but the thing that actually makes the difference isn't any of those things. What is it? He doesn't hesitate, she said, not because he's not intelligent, he's very intelligent, but because the decision was made a long time ago, in training, at a fundamental level, and when the moment comes, there's no deliberation. It's already done. Webb thought about this. How do you get there? You make the decision now, she said, in advance, about what you'll do and why. So that when it happens, you're not making a decision under pressure. You're executing one you already made. She looked at him. He was 22 years old and his hands had been shaking after a man pointed a weapon at the wall beside his head. And they weren't shaking now, they were in his pockets, grounded, the posture of someone who is making the active choice to be steady even when steadiness requires effort. That was its own kind of training. That was the beginning of it. You did fine, she said. You stayed in the room. You stayed present. That's what you had to do. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at Rex. Thanks, he said. It came out quiet. Rex came back to her side and stood, and she let her hand rest on his shoulder, and the last of the daylight was warm on both of them. Garrett came out of the main building and crossed the courtyard slowly. He stopped about 10 feet away, and Evelyn waited, and he said, "We're having a unit dinner. Before deployment tomorrow, Calloway's cooking," which he paused. I should say, Calloway is attempting to cook. which may or may not result in actual food. She didn't smile, exactly, but something in her expression shifted fractionally in the direction of one. Rex is invited, Garrett added. Obviously, he did most of the work. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. Rex then looked at Garrett with the expression of someone who is aware that the statement he did most of the work is technically accurate and is choosing not to dispute it. "We'll be there," she said. Garrett nodded and went back inside. He turned once, briefly, at the door, not looking at her directly but in her direction, the way people orient to a fixed point. Then he went in. Webb stayed another minute, watching Rex trace one more arc across the courtyard before coming to rest at Evelyn's side, patient and present and entirely himself. "I keep thinking about what Cutler said," Webb said. "About the program, about more units. What about it? You're going to run it. The training." She hadn't confirmed this. Cutler had said ask me after the mission and she had said ask me then. But Webb said it as a statement, not a question, with the confidence of someone who has observed cause and effect and drawn the line between them. She didn't correct him. "What does that feel like?" Webb said. "Knowing that what you two do, what you just figured out together, that it's going to be a whole thing now. Bigger than just you." She looked at Rex. Rex, in the last light of the desert day, was watching the perimeter, not with the tension of threat detection, with the calm, habitual attention of something that is always, to some degree, on watch. It was not anxiety. It was not compulsion. It was simply what he was the same way. A compass needle points north, not because it is working hard but because that is what a compass needle does when it is functioning correctly. She thought about Gordon Shaw on a cold hillside in Montana, 30 years ago, teaching a small girl that most of the world's mistakes come from moving too much and waiting too little. She thought about a recovery room and a question asked by a man who looked at her and saw not what she had lost but what she still had. She thought about 14 months of failure and calibration, and the morning she remembered, the exact morning, a cold Tuesday in late November, frost on the ground, when she and Rex had run the sequence together for the first time without a single gap between her intention and his action, when the space between her mind and his body had been, for a few seconds, something like zero, when she had understood that the two of them were not a person and a dog working in coordination but something that didn't have a name yet. She thought about Fitch's exhale on the firing range and Garrett's uncertain walk across the courtyard and Webb's hands shaking in his pockets and Holloway's arms, finally uncrossed, in the courtyard after 12 seconds, had remade everything. She thought about what it had cost to get here. Not bitterly, just with the clarity that comes from having gone through something long and hard and arrived, finally, somewhere real. Strength isn't how you stand, it's who stands with you. It feels, she said, like the beginning. Rex's tail swept the sand once, slow and sure, in the fading light. Nobody laughed. Nobody would.